Robert McDonald exemplifies service-driven and innovative leadership with deep roots in values forged early in life. Born in Gary, Indiana, and raised in Chicago, McDonald's disciplined foundation began at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he graduated in the top 2% of his class with a degree in engineering. After graduation, McDonald served as U.S. Army captain in the 82nd Airborne Division, earning the Ranger Tab and Airborne Wings during his military career. As the former chairman, president, and CEO of Procter Gamble from 2009 to 2013, McDonald was at the helm during one of the company's most transformative periods. He led efforts to expand P&G's reach, adding nearly 1 billion new customers while achieving consistent organic sales growth of 3% annually. Under his leadership, the company prioritized innovation, focusing on customer-centric product development and geographic expansion. McDonald championed sustainability, embedding environmental responsibility into the company's strategy and streamlined operations to drive efficiency. His visionary approach ensured P&G maintained its status as a global leader in consumer goods while adapting to changing market dynamics. In 2014, President Obama appointed McDonald as the 8th United States Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and during his tenure, he enacted critical reforms which included cutting veteran homelessness in half, reducing the disability claims backlog, he improved same-day access to primary and mental health care, and modernizing the VA's medical supply chain. His leadership significantly enhanced the veteran experience and the operational efficiency of the VA. McDonald's contributions also extend internationally. He was honored with the Public Service Star by the Republic of Singapore for his work in developing Singapore as a global hub. Beyond his accolades, his unwavering dedication to service and leadership continues to inspire. So join me for a conversation with Bob McDonald, a transformative leader, innovative thinker, and steadfast servant of purpose in corporate, government, and military settings. I hope you'll enjoy diving into this remarkable story of leadership, service, and impact. Welcome, Bob. I just want you to know we have several people on this show over the years who you know. Mike Duke from Walmart, Herman Bowles, and one of your own from P&G, Tom Muccio.
Great people.
Oh my gosh, all of whom have said to us that, hey, we need to get you on this show. And of course, our mutual friend, Mac McQuiston from the CEO Forum has really told me the same thing. So I just want you to know, Bob, I'm thrilled to have you on today.
I'm thrilled to be with you, Walt. Really am.
Really great to have you. All right, so let's start off a little bit from your roots. You grew up in Chicago, a city really known for its resilience, grit. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so just so you know, I kind of think the same way. But so I just curious, how did your upbringing there shape kind of your values and your leadership principles that really have guided you through just an amazing career?
Well, thank you, Walt. I don't think of my career as amazing. I think it was a work in progress. I'm still a work in progress. But I was born in Gary, Indiana, basically in a house on West 2nd Avenue, which is across the Calumet River from the U.S. Steel Mill. And of course, most people in Gary, Indiana worked in the steel mill. And during my youth, my parents gave me three things. One was faith. We were regular attenders of the Presbyterian Church. My dad was active in many leadership roles in the church. Second was family. My grandparents were just a few blocks away, and we could literally walk or bike to my grandparents' house, and they were a part of our life growing up. And and family's always been very important to my family, and I've tried to do that with my wife and my family. And then third is the impact of leadership. My mom was my scout den mother. My dad was my little league coach. My dad was my scout master. My dad was active in church. My mom was my Sunday school teacher. They really demonstrated to me the importance of climbing in the arena and the importance of leadership and giving back.
Yeah, I think back. A lot of people have asked me that same question too, and I look at my family, and my family gave me faith, and my mother was just a drill sergeant. So I guess you could say she taught me the value of leadership over time. And it's funny because I really think that your upbringing and your family really do shape so much of what you become.
Oh, absolutely. I first applied to go to West Point when I was in sixth grade. I was 11 years old, and it was always something I wanted to do. I would watch a show on Saturday called The Big Army. It was on early in the morning, and I was intrigued with this idea of leading soldiers. And I applied in sixth grade, and fortunately, I had a congressman who never discouraged me. He said, keep applying every year, and we'll take your best scores on the tests and so forth when you're ready to go. And that congressman was Don Rumsfeld. And during the time I was Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, I had the opportunity several times to talk to Secretary Rumsfeld and thank him for the lesson I learned from him, which is never discourage a young person, always encourage them.
Wow, what an amazing person you had in your life. So, Bob, you've led both a global consumer powerhouse, P&G, and a federal agency. I got to tell you, there are not a lot of people that have had the opportunity to lead both. Um, so I'm kind of curious how your leadership style evolved from Procter and Gamble to the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Well, a little background. So P&G would have been about Fortune 20, 25 or so, 120,000 employees, roughly over 100 countries around the world, a global business, about 300 brands, about $85 billion in sales. In contrast, the Department of Veterans Affairs is the second largest department in the federal government after the Department of Defense. You have over 300,000 employees, and you have a budget of about $300 billion, mostly domestic, although you do have operations, obviously, in Puerto Rico and places like that. To me, the principle of leadership is the same. My belief is leadership is the most scarce resource in the world. And as a result, it's also the most highly leverageable activity in the world. So if you, as the CEO of a company or the secretary of a department, aren't working on leadership, you're probably working on the wrong thing.
Mm.
Secondly, any organization that wants to be a high performance organization needs to have a leadership model. It needs to have a leadership model which gives them the currency to talk about leadership. And then you have to build that model into your recruiting, into your development, into your training, into your promotion programs, and so forth. And for example, at the VA, when I got there, we had 75 different leadership models, all from 75 different consultants. And we had to eliminate all of that and develop our own model that was consistent. At P&G, we also developed a leadership model, and it transcended everything we did in the organization. But I would say that the principles of leadership are the same. So you have to envision, you have to engage people, you have to energize people, you have to enable people, you have to execute. Those are the 5 E's of the leadership model I use. But what's different is the motivation. So obviously in government, you don't have the financial motivations you do in the private sector. You don't have stock options and so forth. But what you have to focus on is 2 parts that we built into a leadership model of the federal government in an organization I was on the board of called the Partnership for Public Service. And those 2 elements are stewardship of the public trust, which is incredibly important. That's why people go into government, and commitment to the public good. Those are at the center of the leadership in public service, and I think so you have to focus more on those as motivators than on the financial rewards and other things you would in a for-profit company.
Yeah. Do people there, Bob? I'm just kind of curious. Do people there naturally have that? I mean, are they there because they naturally have that?
Yes, they self-selected. I mean,
Yeah.
why did I want to go to West Point? And
Right.
obviously to get through 4 years at West Point and military service, you have to want it
Right.
yourself. It has to be intrinsic, and you self-select.
Yeah. But then you have to leverage off of that and remind them that they're there for that reason, and that becomes part of your leadership model.
Well, that's exactly right. Because,
Yeah.
for example, in 2014, when I got to the Department of Veterans Affairs, we had struggled in Phoenix to care for veterans. We had promised 14 days from the time you call to an appointment. We were incapable of delivering that. So there were a lot of crises in the news about that. And what I had to do, first and foremost, was to remind people our customers on the top of the pyramid. The customer is the veteran, and we've got to focus on serving the customer. That's motivating for the employees.
Yep. Makes sense. So at P&G, you spearheaded innovative strategies, and I think I read someplace where you added 1 billion customers during your tenure there,
Mm-hmm.
and created what I think is an impressive 60% increase in shareholder value over a 3 or 4, 5 year period of time or so.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons about innovation and growth can you give to leaders today that you learned from your time there?
Well, I think I've become a huge believer in innovation, and I took that learning to the Department of Veterans Affairs, where we spend over $2 billion a year on medical innovation primarily.
Mm.
If the purpose of the Procter and Gamble company is to improve the lives of the world's consumers, and on any given day, over 5 billion people on the planet use at least one Procter and Gamble product, well, the way we improve lives is through innovation. And innovation comes about um, uh, in a very structural, very systematic way. You just can't let it be serendipitous or you won't get it. Let me give you an example. If you're familiar with our product, Swiffer, which can be used to clean the floors, that's like taking a Pampers disposable diaper, putting it on the end of a stick, and taking some Mr. Clean fluid and spraying it on the floor. Well, no consumer, none of our 5 billion, 6 billion consumers are going to say, well, I have this idea, let's put these things together. Somebody else has to come up with that. You have to come up with that. So what we would do as a company is anytime we go to a foreign country or another location, we go into people's homes, we'd watch them use our products, we go into stores, we watch them shop, and from that we would look for insights. And then we would purposely get together diverse teams of people to build on each other's ideas. And what we found through our experience then and even now is diverse groups of people are much more innovative than homogeneous groups of people. The reason for that is innovation doesn't occur in a straight line. It's kind of a sawtooth activity where one person offers an idea, another person builds on it, and so forth, and they keep building until you get to the end result. That's something I learned from a fellow named Dr. James Burke, who wrote a book called Connections. And basically his thesis was ideas get connected through various different people, diverse groups of people, to the end point.
It's interesting how you went out and actually watched what the customers did and ultimately innovated based on their needs.
Well, there's a great story about that, and if I'm talking too much, please stop me.
No, no, you're
But
fine.
when we bought the Gillette company in 2005, I think it was,
Sure. Right.
uh, we, I, their business was not very strong in India, for example, in a
Mm.
developing country in India. And so I went to Boston and I said, I don't understand this. How did you test this razor? Why are we not doing well in India? And they said, well, we went to MIT. This is before we bought the company. We went to MIT and we hired some Indian students to come in and use the razor, and they really liked it. and I said, well, did you ever go to India? And so I took a group of people to India, and we went into a fellow's home, and we asked him to use our razor. And of course, what we saw was the Indian gentleman sat on the floor cross-legged. He didn't have running water, so he put water in like a soup can that he had used the night before, and he rinsed the razor in that can of water. Well, without running water, it was very hard for him to get the suds of the gel or the foam off of the razor, and therefore it didn't perform as well. So obviously we created a wishbone shape, we created more space between the blades, things to accommodate it, and obviously the business took off. You got to know your customer, and you got to know your customer intimately.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I assume sales took off in India at that point in time, right?
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah. Oh, it's axiomatic, right, Walt? I mean, if you know your customer and if you're close to your customer, you'll do well. I mean, this is what we brought to the VA, was this passion and focus on the customer.
Yeah, that's powerful, and nobody does it better than P&G. Your your tenure at P&G really included navigating the Great Recession, which you and I talked about earlier. But we both led public companies during this, what I would call, incredibly challenging period. And at least for me, it was not easy. We got through it, and I became a better person, I think, as a result of it. But I'm just curious, when you look back on that, how did you maintain employee morale and growth? I think you still grew during that period of time, during what I think is probably one of the most challenging times, at least in my career.
Well, I'm not sure I did it well. I think the company did well. I didn't do as well, and we grew at like 3% on top line. We wanted to grow more, but again, whenever a crisis occurs, in my opinion, human psychology is to close the windows, draw up the drawbridges, and a boxing analogy or metaphor would be don't hit me anymore.
Yeah.
And what you find you need to do in those crises situations is actually get everybody out of the office. Get everybody out of the office and go visit your customer and learn what your customer needs. It reminds me of when I got to Japan. I led our Japanese operation for 6 years. And I got to Japan, and we had done very poorly in the previous years. And what I discovered was everybody was trying to do the same thing, working harder rather than working differently. So I literally had to turn the lights off at night to force people out of the building. I had to force them to take vacation. I had to force them to visit their customers and learn about their customers. I had to force them to come back with insights of how we could change what we were doing, because you tend to work harder doing the same thing, and that's not the solution.
Wow, that's I would say that our company hunkered down, just like you said. We became a lot more inwardly focused. Although I will say that that inward focus for us probably helped us because it brought us together a little
Sure.
bit more as a company. But I think you, being the customer, oriented company that you were, I think doubling down on that and moving out probably made an incredible impact.
Well, this was the big issue at the VA. We were in a crisis when I became secretary,
Mm,
and arguably the bureaucracy became the customer rather than the customer being the customer. So one of the things I had to do was convince people to put the customer on top of the pyramid. Most people think of an organization as a pyramid with the CEO, or in this case, the secretary, on top. And one of my favorite graphic examples was to turn that on its head and show that I and the leadership are on the bottom, and the exalted ones were our customers or our veterans across the top. And then I train people in something called human-centered design, where we journey mapped the veteran journey from the day you raise your hand and are sworn in to the day we bury you in a VA cemetery, and we looked at all the touch points that the service member and veteran would have with the VA. We got scores for all of those, and then we worked to re-engineer them. And at the time we started in the fall of 2014, the measure of trust of the VA was 47% amongst veterans. And today, even though I've been out of office since 2017, the score is over 90%. So
that's amazing.
People want to do the right thing,
Yeah.
but we have to enable them to do the right thing. We have to give them the training in the public sector that we give to people in the private sector in order to delight consumers.
Bob, aside from getting them to focus on the customer, which I love the inverted pyramid story, can you talk about some of the critical reforms that you had to implement there?
I think the biggest, Walt, is really about the culture, and I talk a lot about leadership, and obviously leadership is well covered by many books.
Right.
There's not as much on culture, and my predecessor had been a senior officer in the military and had instituted a rather military culture. What do I mean by that? Everybody would stand up when I came in the room. There'd be tent cards on the table. There'd be flags. When I traveled, there were a bunch of people that wanted to go with me. I had somebody that they wanted to assign to me called a bag man. I said, what's a bag man? Well, that's the person that carries your bag. Well, nobody carries my bag. I was an infantryman. I was an airborne ranger infantryman. Nobody carries my bag. And we had to break that down. And here's why. And this was an aha to me when I joined Procter & Gamble. I joined Procter & Gamble. I was a captain in the Army, and everybody I met that first day, April 4th, 1980, I called ma'am and sir, because that was the way I was trained. And John Pepper, my first general manager at P&G, said, we go by a first name basis, and one of our values is trust, and intimacy leads to trust. And if you have intimacy and you have trust, then bad news will go up the chain of command as quickly as good news. And what happened to my predecessor, who I have tremendous admiration for, was he never got the bad news. He had the 14 days goal, 14 days from the day you call till you get an appointment. But what the people were doing was they were cooking the books. They say, okay, you called me, Walt, I'm going to call you back when it's 14 days from your appointment. And that was what blew up in the news media. And how do you create that intimacy so the person is willing to give you the bad news? So I had to eliminate all that. In fact, one of the things I did that was rather figurative or poignant for many people was at my first national press conference with the Washington Post and others in October of 2014. I gave out my cell phone number, and the idea was, okay, I am the resource of last resort. If you can't get good activity from the other leaders of the VA, call me and I'll get it for you. And I set up a team of people that would resolve veteran problems. And to this day, I still get calls from veterans and I still help them.
That's an amazing story. I know as a leader the importance of getting positive feedback from time to time, especially from your employees and your customers. Did you get that direct feedback or kind of expressions of gratitude from veterans throughout the country?
I did, but I also got the criticism as well.
The good and the bad.
Yeah, I mean, but I try not to let that affect me because I knew what I was trying to do. I had measures of our activity and the improvement in trust, for example. But yes, of course you do, and I still get feedback. I had a guy call me the other day, said, I called you a few years ago and you solved my problem. Well, I have another problem. Can you solve it? And of course, we worked hard to do that. And in my role as the chairman of the board of the West Point Association of Graduates, one of the things we did in the last year is we installed a VA trained counselor for West Point graduates, and that's now become one of our most popular services for graduates.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We all need somebody that can give us a little bit of advice as we
Absolutely.
as we
And of
go
course,
through.
as you know, and you know this, Walt, the cultural change I wanted was I wanted everybody else in the chain of command, everybody else in the organization, all 300,000 people, giving out their cell phone number, metaphorically,
Yeah,
being increasing their ability. Because when I got to the VA, people come to me and say, well, here's your email address, and don't worry, nobody will figure it out. We'll change it every other week. Or I'd meet with a member of Congress, and they'd be hard to reach. And basically, what I did was I said, well, here's my cell phone number. Now give me yours. And I was working to create that intimacy.
yeah. So, Bob, looking back on it, curious if you had someone in the room and they were asking you advice for a leader. So, what advice do you have for leaders that are tasked with, let's just say, running large, complex organizations, and especially those in public service?
Well, my first advice is develop a purpose.
Mm,
A purpose leads to a much more rewarding life than meandering through life without direction. And it pains me to see, when I speak at a university or a graduate school, it pains me to see the number of young people who are going through life without purpose, whose whose goal, which they believe disguises as purpose, is some position or some salary level. And as you and I both know,
yeah,
that's not worthy of a life. What's worthy of a life is trying to make a difference in the lives of others.
yeah,
So that's number one. Number two is just the as we talked earlier, the importance of leadership. There is no more highly leverageable skill than to learn leadership, and it pains me to some degree how little leadership is taught in universities, in graduate schools, in corporations, and leadership. Uh, I've seen leadership change organizations overnight, which has had tremendous outcomes for the people. um, I joke with people. We're very competitive at West Point, of course, and we joke
no, really?
we we joke that at the Air Force Academy you have statues of airplanes. At the Naval Academy you have statues of ships and anchors and Tecumseh and other things. At West Point we have nothing but statues of people,
Hmm,
and it's people who are leaders. And you look at the leaders and the difference they made, whether it's Dwight Eisenhower, Ulysses Grant. Obviously they were put in a difficult situation, but they made a difference. They made a huge difference.
yeah. Okay, so let's turn to that. Talk a little bit about some personal insights that you have. You were very involved in the unveiling of the Ulysses S. Grant statue at West Point. Took place in, I believe, April of 2019. And can you talk a little bit about that? I'd just
Sure.
like to, hear a little bit about your involvement, why you were involved in that, and what you got out of that.
It's kind of a funny story actually, but it's one that resonated with me from my time as Secretary of the VA. So when the National Defense Authorization Act was put together years before, a West Point graduate who was on the staff in the Senate side, I believe, wrote into the National Defense Authorization Act that there should be a statue of Ulysses S. Grant on the plane, which is the main parade field of West Point.
Mm,
We have At West Point, we've had two presidents, Grant and Eisenhower. There's a
mm,
statue of Eisenhower, but there was no statue of Grant. Well, as many things happen in Congress, and this happened to me when I was Secretary of the VA, they authorized the statue, but they didn't appropriate the money for it. They provided no money for it. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot. So my classmate, Bob Caslin, was the lieutenant general that was superintendent of West Point. And he was wondering, through our Association of Graduates, if my wife and I would be willing to donate the money for the statue. And of course, Ulysses Grant was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where the Procter and Gamble company was located. That's where my wife and I have spent the majority of our married life. And so we both jumped at the chance and thought it very appropriate to have Grant on the plane. We developed a historic committee at West Point, which is another funny story. And we hired an outstanding sculptor to sculpt the statue. But there was a lot of debate. How do we portray Grant? Grant was somebody who wore a slouch cap, who wore a private's shirt. He never really wore rank or things. He was a great horseman. So do we put him on a horse? Do we not put him on a horse? And it ended up we decided not to put him on a horse, so it would match Eisenhower, MacArthur, Patton, and other statues. But then when the sculptor was wondering, how do we get the detail of what his uniform looked like, it was easy. We went to the museum and we got his uniform. we had his uniform, we had his gloves, we had his boots, we had his hat, we had everything. And so we literally were able to dress a mannequin and kind of digitize the statue, and then she just did an outstanding job of sculpting it, and there it sits. It's as Bob Caslin said when my classmate, when he was superintendent, he said, I want the statue to be put in a place where it's the last thing the cadets see before they turn into the barracks after a review, after a parade. Because Grant, in many ways, is the leader that many of us aspire to be. And I think historians have changed their story on Grant. Ron Chernow wrote a book recently. Ron White wrote a book recently, and both of them talk about the tremendous work he did, not only in winning the Civil War, but also in implementing Reconstruction after the Civil War.
Well, congratulations on doing it. By the way, I listened to your speech, which was excellent.
Thank you.
The unveiling. You did a great job, and so anyway, I think that's something to be incredibly proud of, and so well done.
Pride not allowed, but a good step forward. Work in progress.
I'm allowed to say that, not you.
I know. Thank you.
Hey, Bob, you've earned recognition globally. I know you don't love to talk about this stuff, but I do, and other people need to know. But you're a distinguished graduate, had won the Distinguished Graduate Award at West Point, and then you won a Public Service Star Award in Singapore. Is there one particular honor that you're really just proud of? I know you don't like to be proud, but is there one that you especially feel good about?
Well, actually, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Chamber of Commerce. And one of the things that I said at that time was I didn't want the award. I actually tried to turn it back. And Eric Eversole, the fellow who was responsible for it, said, no, you've got to take it. And I said, well, I can't, because these are normally given to people who are no longer working or no longer, working for the betterment of others, maybe people who are dead. So I can't take it. So my whole speech was about, I'm not finished yet. Well, I was working with President Bush at the time in his Veterans Leadership Program, and I didn't expect this, but here comes a video of President Bush, and his last line was, McDonald, I just want you to remember you're not finished yet. And, and so certainly I took that away, but quite honestly, I'm not finished yet, and I've got a lot to do. And I always think back to that closing scene in Saving Private Ryan, where Matt Damon is standing over the grave of Captain Miller, Tom Hanks, who saved his life, and he turns to his family and says, please tell me that I've earned it. And I have many friends buried in cemeteries. There are many veterans buried in cemeteries whose lives were cut terribly short and have not had the opportunity that you or I have. And I think of those people every day, and I think about my need to continue to earn it. So I'm working hard to earn it, mostly in the nonprofit area, and I will until probably the day I die.
Well, Bob, speaking of not being finished yet, I have to ask you about your decision and Deanne's decision to launch the McDonald Conference for Leaders of Character. Can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Well, that's another kind of humorous story, Walt. Back when I was the vice chairman of the Procter Gamble company, I think I was chief operating officer at the time, I was given an award for leadership by the Naval Academy and the Harvard Business Review. And I was really incensed. It was another award that I was thinking about not accepting because I didn't like the idea of the Naval Academy being known for leadership or the Naval Academy partnering with Harvard Business Review. So I called West Point and I said, look, I'm going to take this award, but we got to do something at West Point because if there's an institution that should be known as the premier institution for the creation of leaders, it's West Point. The other vector that intersected this was throughout my experience working at P&G all over the world, I discovered that really knotty problems of the world can't be solved by any one person or any one country. You know, the idea of the Lone Ranger being the metaphor for leadership, yes, to some degree, it takes an individual to take initiative, but it really takes a group of people probably working globally to solve some of these really, really hairy problems. So my wife and I came up with the idea, well, why don't we take the leadership department at West Point, arguably the best leadership department in the world, bring together like 80 students, student leaders, nominated by their presidents of their universities, bring them together for a transformative experience at West Point, teach them a little bit about West Point, but then talk about leadership, not just military leadership, but secular leadership or civilian leadership. And so far we've probably touched about 700 student leaders. We've been doing this now since 2012. We have our next 2025 version in March, and we'll touch another 80 or so student leaders. And the idea is that after we have this event, we keep this cohort connected through social media. And as they go out in the world and as they achieve great things, they're able to communicate with each other and join each other. This became very real to me in 2019. I was asked to go to Kyiv, Ukraine. I was out of office, but I was asked to go there to help them establish a Department of Veterans Affairs because they had none. And obviously, in those days, they'd been fighting in Donbass, in the eastern Ukraine. Putin had not yet invaded all of Ukraine. And a lady was presenting to me this idea in this country, we thank veterans for their service. In Ukraine, that's not typical. But what they've taught Ukrainians to do was put their hand over their heart when they would pass a veteran. Well, this was the idea of a young lady, and she was able to get companies to support public service announcements on television and elsewhere. And as she was presenting, I kept saying to myself, gee, I think I've seen her somewhere before. I must know her. Well, come to find out, she had been to our conference for leaders of character at West Point years earlier and had gone back to Ukraine to make a difference. And I was just so proud of her. And I was proud, proud's the wrong word, but I was just so thankful that we had an impact.
That's amazing. What a great story that is. So 700, is it every March?
Every March. March could be late February, but yeah, generally every March.
Yeah, March of each year. 80 new students.
Brought in from around the world. So Tokyo University, Peking University, Oxford, Cambridge. Their presidents have to nominate them. All expenses paid. My wife and I pay an endowment that we set up, pays all the expenses. They come to West Point and we spend about 4 or 5 days together. They learn about West Point, but they also then go through leadership training, and we bring in leaders from industry, government, from all over the world. And they participate as well, and they become the senior fellows or the mentors for these young people.
How powerful is that? That is just great. So 700 and counting.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, it's my mission in life.
Well, that leads me to my last question, which is kind of a final reflection. I'm asking all my guests this year about purpose. You mentioned purpose earlier on in advice, develop a purpose. And I totally agree. Without a purpose, it's almost like we're directionless in life. What single purpose are you most passionate about pursuing, Bob?
Yeah, I think, well, I would embrace the Procter and Gamble statement that I'm here to improve lives.
Hmm.
It's the statement of P&G, improving the lives of the world consumers. It's consistent with my faith, which, you know, care for the least of these. Um, it it reminds me of the Phil Collins song, "A Day in Paradise." Don't walk by that homeless person sitting on the street. If you look at life through that lens, you become insatiably driven because there's just so many things that need to be done to care for people, and it reminds me of a discussion you and I had earlier. At the time we had about 70,000 veterans, I think, who were homeless. President Obama's goal and my goal was to eliminate that. We didn't achieve it, but we did cut it by about 70%. And the issue is nobody wants to be homeless. So why are there homeless people? And why can't we get to know those people so intimately that we can figure out the root cause and solve that root cause so that they're not homeless?
Well, I think that's a very noble purpose, and I think you've not only have you accomplished that through P&G, but you've increasingly accomplished that through everything that you're doing in the Veterans Affairs and since then. And my hat's off to you, Bob. I think you've done a great job. Keep up the great work.
Well, thank you. Well, you inspire me. It's been great to be with you.
You inspire me too. And I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Off the Rack. You have been just absolutely terrific and some nuggets of wisdom for hopefully a lot of people out there. And so I'm really grateful to you, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Walt. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of you who tuned in today. Look, you can always find more insights from our guests in Off the Rack Plus, our newsletter. We've got episode highlights, transcripts, helpful takeaways, all those sorts of things. Follow Off the Rack on your favorite podcast platform. Leave a review. Share this episode with someone who needs a little purpose-infused inspiration, which I think you got a lot of today. Until next time, I'm going to encourage all of you to be human with one another and find a way to have a positive influence on someone around you each and every day. Thank you.